Family. They are supposed to be your safe harbor, your ultimate protection against a harsh world. But for Bella, marrying into the Smith family felt like stepping into a gilded cage where the floor was lined with broken glass. For 3 agonizing years, she swallowed their insults, scrubbed their floors, and wore the label of the useless, penniless daughter-in-law to keep the peace for the man she loved. They thought she was nothing, a charity case, clinging to their wealth. They were dead wrong. It took exactly one high-stakes dinner, one ruined dress, and a sudden visit from a billionaire CEO to shatter their illusions. By the time the dessert was served, the most powerful man in the state wasn't talking to the Smiths. He was bowing to Bella. The Smith family estate sat on a sprawling 3-acre plot in the most exclusive zip code of Greenwich, Connecticut. It was a monument to old money and new arrogance, complete with manicured hedges, a driveway paved with imported Italian cobblestone, and wrought iron gates that seemed designed more to keep the lesser people out than to keep the family in. Inside this mansion lived Beatrice Smith, the undisputed matriarch, a woman whose entire existence revolved around country club hierarchies, charity galas she barely attended, and ensuring the world knew she was better than them. And then there was Bella. Bella Hayes was 28, possessing a quiet, unassuming beauty that Beatrice frequently described as painfully pedestrian. When Bella first met David Smith at a modest coffee shop in downtown Boston, he wasn't the heir to a fortune. He was a struggling graduate student, overwhelmed by expectations, desperate for a listening ear. Bella, working quietly on her laptop in the corner, had become his anchor. She listened, she encouraged, and she loved him. For a brief, shining moment, David had been a man willing to forge his own path. But the moment David proposed to Bella, the Smith family machinery engaged. Beatrice was horrified. Bella had no pedigree. She had no trust fund. When asked what she did for a living at the engagement dinner, Bella had simply smiled and said, "I do freelance consulting in the tech sector." To Beatrice, freelance was simply a polite word for unemployed. From the day of the wedding, a lavish affair, where Bella felt more like a prop than a bride, the psychological torment began. The Smiths didn't just dislike Bella, they actively sought to erode her spirit. They moved the newlyweds into the east wing of the Greenwich estate, framing it as a financial favor until David got his footing as a junior executive at Cross Industries. In reality, it was a trap. It placed Bella directly under Beatrice's manicured, suffocating thumb. "Bella, dear." Beatrice would purr over morning coffee, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I see you're wearing that dreadful cardigan again. It's so brave of you to ignore fashion entirely. I suppose when one doesn't leave the house to work a real job, standards do tend to slip." Bella would merely smile tight-lipped, take a sip of her black coffee, and return to her laptop. David, the man who had once promised to protect her against the world, slowly dissolved into the wallpaper of his childhood home. The pressure to succeed at Cross Industries, a monolithic tech conglomerate, consumed him. Whenever Bella tried to express her pain regarding his mother's treatment, David would sigh, rub his temples, and say, "Bella, please, you know how mother is. Just bear with it. I'm up for a promotion next quarter. Don't make waves right now. If I can just get Alexander Cross to notice my division, we can move out. I promise." It was always next quarter. Always just bear with it. Bella's sister-in-law, Chloe, was worse. Chloe was 24, armed with a trust fund and an Instagram following, and viewed Bella as a live-in maid who happened to share her brother's bed. Chloe would routinely leave her designer dresses in a heap on Bella's bed with a sticky note, "Dry cleaner by 5 p.m. Thanks, babe." What the Smiths did not know what David, in his self-absorption, had never bothered to fully understand was that Bella's freelance consulting was a massive understatement. Bella was the sole founder of Vanguard Solutions, a boutique cybersecurity and software architecture firm. Years ago, before she even met David, Bella had written a proprietary encryption algorithm that caught the eye of a struggling tech firm on the verge of a catastrophic data breach. Bella had stepped in, patched the vulnerabilities, and restructured their entire backend under a strict non-disclosure agreement. That struggling tech firm had been Cross Industries. Today, Cross Industries was a multi-billion-dollar empire, and Bella remained its most fiercely protected asset, a shadow partner who held a permanent, highly lucrative retainer and a staggering amount of equity. She liked her anonymity. It allowed her to work in peace, avoiding the vicious corporate politics she despised. But living in the Smith household was stretching her legendary patience to its absolute limit. The breaking point began to form on a rainy Tuesday in early November. David burst into their bedroom, his face flushed with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "He's coming," David gasped, loosening his tie. "Alexander Cross. He's doing a tour of the regional executive teams. Mother just pulled some strings with the board. She's hosting a private dinner for him here this Saturday." Bella looked up from her screen, a line of code reflecting in her dark eyes. "Alexander is coming here?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Yes, Bella, you don't understand. This is my shot. If I can impress him in an intimate setting, if I can pitch my division's new integration model, the VP spot is mine." David grabbed her shoulders, his grip a little too tight. "Everything has to be perfect. Mother is handling the catering, but we need you to stay out of the way. You know how you get, awkward, around high-profile people." Bella stared at the man she had married, the man who thought she was awkward around the very billionaire who texted her every Christmas to thank her for saving his company. "I'll stay out of the way, David," Bella said softly, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "I promise. You won't even know I'm there." The 48 hours leading up to the dinner were a masterclass in domestic tyranny. Beatrice Smith, transformed from a passive-aggressive socialite into a full-blown dictator, the estate was crawling with florists, caterers, and interior decorators. The theme is understated opulence. Beatrice barked at a terrified florist, arranging white orchids in the foyer. "I want Mr. Cross to feel like he's walking into a European consulate, not a cheap greenhouse." Bella, keeping to her promise to stay out of the way, tried to work in the sunroom, but Beatrice had other plans. If Bella was going to live under her roof for free, Beatrice reasoned, she was going to earn her keep. "Bella," Beatrice snapped, marching into the sunroom and snapping Bella's laptop shut, nearly catching Bella's fingers in the hinge. "What are you doing? The caterers are short-staffed. The sous chef called in sick. Get into the kitchen and help prep the amuse-bouches. And for heaven's sake, put your hair up. You look like a stray dog." Bella took a deep breath, the familiar sting of humiliation washing over her. "Beatrice, I am in the middle of a delicate deployment for a client. I cannot chop vegetables right now." "A client?" Chloe sneered, walking into the room, sipping a green juice. "What? Did someone pay you $50 to fix their printer? Go chop the celery, Bella. We need this night to be perfect for David. Don't be so incredibly selfish." Bella looked out the window. The rain was beating against the glass. She thought about packing her bags right then and there. She had enough money in her personal accounts to buy the Smith estate 3 times over and turn it into a parking lot. But a lingering, foolish sliver of hope for her marriage held her back. She wanted to see if David would finally stand up for her. When David came home, Bella pulled him aside. "David, your mother wants me to work in the kitchen alongside the catering staff for the dinner." David wouldn't meet her eyes. He focused on adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "Bella, it's just for one night. The catering company is swamped. Mother is stressed. Just play along, okay? Once I get this VP role, we're out of here. Please, do this for me." The last remnants of Bella's blind devotion withered and died in that exact moment. Her husband was not a victim of his family. He was a willing participant in her degradation. "Okay, David," Bella whispered. The warmth had completely left her voice. "I'll play my part." Saturday evening arrived. The mansion smelled of roasted thyme, expensive floor wax, and desperate ambition. Bella had retreated to her room to change. She wasn't planning to wear anything flashy, just a simple, elegant, navy blue silk dress she had purchased in Paris years ago. It was conservative, respectful, and appropriately understated. She was at her vanity, applying a light coat of mascara, when Chloe barged into the room holding a steaming mug of black coffee. "David says you're not coming down until the main course is served," Chloe said, leaning against the doorframe, her eyes raking over Bella's silk dress with blatant jealousy. "You actually think you're going to sit at the table in that? It looks like a trash bag." "It's vintage, Chloe. And yes, David asked me to stay out of sight, but I live here. I am going to sit at my own dining table," Bella replied evenly, standing up. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You really don't get it, do you? You are a stain on this family. Mr. Cross is royalty. We can't have him looking at a peasant." As Bella took a step forward to walk past her, Chloe deliberately shifted her weight and tripped, sending the entire mug of scalding hot coffee directly onto Bella's dress. Bella gasped, the hot liquid burning her skin, the dark stain instantly ruining the delicate silk. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy," Chloe mocked, not a trace of genuine apology in her voice. She smiled wickedly. "Guess you'll have to find something else to wear, or better yet, just stay in the kitchen where you belong." Chloe turned and sauntered out of the room. Bella stood frozen, staring at her ruined reflection. The physical burn on her chest was nothing compared to the fiery rage igniting in her chest. She had endured the snide remarks. She had endured the financial control. She had endured David's cowardice. But this blatant, malicious sabotage? Bella walked over to her phone. She opened her contacts and scrolled down to a number saved simply as A.C. She typed a quick text. "There has been a change of plans regarding tonight's dynamic. Follow my lead." A reply came almost instantly. "Understood, boss. See you in 10. Bella stripped off the ruined silk dress. She didn't have another formal gown here. Her best clothes were in a storage unit in the city. She opened her closet and pulled out the only thing she had left that was clean: a crisp, white button-down shirt, a tailored black blazer, and a pair of fitted black slacks. It was the exact outfit she wore when she was in the trenches, coding for 48 hours straight. It was her armor. Downstairs, the doorbell chimed. The grand arrival had begun. Bella took a deep breath, tied her hair back into a severe bun, and walked down the stairs, not toward the kitchen, but toward the dining room. The dining room was a theater of the absurd. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glittering light over a mahogany table set with vintage Smith silver and bone china. Beatrice stood at the head of the room, vibrating with anxious energy, while David practically hovered by the entryway, sweating through his custom-tailored suit. Bella slipped into the room, standing quietly in the shadowed corner, near the French doors. "What is she doing here?" Beatrice hissed, catching sight of Bella's business attire. She grabbed David's arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. "David, I thought I told you to keep her in the kitchen. Look at what she's wearing. She looks like a mid-level accountant." David rushed over to Bella, his face a mask of panic. "Bella, please," he whispered frantically. "What happened to your dress? You can't be in here looking like this. Mr. Cross is pulling up to the driveway, right now. Go back upstairs. I'll have Victoria bring you a plate later." Bella looked at David, her eyes completely devoid of the affection she once harbored for him. "No," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet room. "What do you mean, no?" David hissed, glancing nervously toward the foyer. "Bella, don't do this to me. Not tonight. I am your wife, David." "I will sit at this table," Bella replied, stepping out of the shadows and pulling out a chair at the far end of the table, furthest from the place of honor. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and stared straight ahead. Before David could forcefully remove her, the heavy oak front doors opened. The murmurs in the foyer ceased instantly. Alexander Cross walked in. He was a man who commanded the very air in a room. In his late 50s, with silver hair clipped short and piercing blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing, Alexander moved with the predatory grace of a man who had built an empire from the ground up and destroyed his enemies along the way. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the average car, but it was his presence, not his clothes, that intimidated. Behind him trailed two stone-faced executive assistants and a bodyguard who looked large enough to eclipse the sun. "Mr. Cross, Beatrice practically glided across the floor, extending a hand dripping in diamonds. "It is an absolute honor to welcome you to our home. I am Beatrice Smith, and this is my son, David." Alexander accepted her hand for a brief, obligatory shake, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Smith, a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation." David stepped forward, offering a stiff bow. "Mr. Cross, sir, it's an honor. I'm David Smith, lead manager in the Northeast Integration Division. We've prepared a wonderful evening for you." "Integration, yes," Alexander murmured, his eyes scanning the room. He seemed thoroughly unimpressed by the lavish displays of wealth. He despised old money posturing. "Let's eat, shall we? I have an early flight to Tokyo tomorrow." The family scrambled to their seats. Beatrice took the head, gesturing for Alexander to sit to her right. David sat to Alexander's left, desperate for proximity. Chloe sat opposite them, batting her eyelashes and trying to look worldly. And there, at the very end of the table, sat Bella, silent and composed. Alexander's eyes swept the table as he unfolded his napkin. His gaze paused for a fraction of a second on Bella, a micro-expression, a tiny twitch of amusement at the corner of his mouth flashed across his face before disappearing behind his stoic facade. Bella gave him an almost imperceptible nod. The first course was served, a delicate lobster bisque. The tension at the table was suffocating. David immediately launched into a rehearsed, desperate monologue. "Mr. Cross, I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss the Q3 projections for my division," David began, his voice slightly too loud. "I believe that with a structural reorganization, we can increase efficiency by 15%. I've drawn up some preliminary models that I'd love to show you over dessert." Beatrice chimed in, smiling rigidly. "David is so dedicated, Mr. Cross. He practically lives at the office. We raised him to be a visionary, much like yourself." Alexander took a slow spoonful of his soup. He didn't look at David. He didn't look at Beatrice. He set the spoon down, the clink of the silver echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Visionaries," Alexander said, his voice a deep baritone that demanded absolute silence, "are not raised in country clubs, Mrs. Smith. They are forged in fire. They are the ones who see the matrix, while the rest of us are just staring at the screen." David swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. "Exactly, sir. And that's why my approach to the integration protocol is—" "Mr. Smith," Alexander interrupted smoothly, holding up a single finger. David snapped his mouth shut. "I am not here tonight to discuss Q3 projections for a division I am considering liquidating by the end of the year." The color completely drained from David's face. Beatrice dropped her spoon. Chloe let out a tiny, undignified gasp. "Liquidating, sir?" David stammered, his career flashing before his eyes. "Yes," Alexander said casually, taking a sip of his wine. "Your department is bloated, inefficient, and frankly, uninspired. I didn't come to Greenwich tonight for a pitch, David. I accepted this dinner invitation for one very specific reason." Beatrice leaned forward, desperate to salvage the evening. "Whatever it is, Mr. Cross, we are at your disposal. Name it." Alexander leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. His piercing blue eyes slowly drifted down the length of the long mahogany table, past the trembling David, past the terrified Beatrice, past the sneering Chloe, until his gaze locked directly onto the quiet woman in the black blazer, sitting at the very end. "I came," Alexander said, his voice dropping an octave, "because I was informed that the architect of my empire was residing in this house, and I have spent the last 10 minutes wondering why the smartest person I have ever met in my entire life has been shoved into the corner like unwanted furniture." Silence, absolute deafening silence, descended upon the dining room. David blinked, confusion warping his features. He looked around the room, then looked at his mother. "Sir? Architect? I don't understand." "My father, Harrison, passed away years ago. He wasn't an architect." "I am not talking about your father, David," Alexander said sharply. Alexander pushed his chair back and stood up. The scraping of the wood against the floor sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He ignored Beatrice. He stepped past David. He walked slowly, deliberately, down the length of the table, toward Bella. Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. What is he doing? She thought frantically. Why is he approaching the stray dog? Alexander stopped directly behind Bella's chair. Bella calmly reached for her wineglass, taking a measured sip, entirely unfazed by the billionaire looming over her. Alexander, Bella said softly, her voice carrying a tone of casual authority that made David's jaw literally drop open. The bisque is quite good. You should finish it. Alexander Cross, the ruthless titan of industry, the man who had just terrified David into near paralysis, let out a booming, genuine laugh. I don't care about the soup, Bella, Alexander replied. And then, in front of the horrified, gaping eyes of the Smith family, Alexander Cross stepped to the side, placed his right hand over his heart, and bowed deeply and respectfully to the woman they had treated like dirt for 3 years. It is an honor to finally share a table with you, boss, Alexander said. The sound of Beatrice Smith's Smith silver soup spoon hitting the bone china bowl echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous dining room. For a full 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The reality of what had just happened simply could not be processed by the Smith family's collective ego. Alexander Cross, a man who regularly dined with senators, tech moguls from Silicon Valley, and the managing partners at Goldman Sachs, was bowing to Bella, to the woman Beatrice had ordered to chop celery not 3 hours prior. David's mind practically short-circuited. He looked from his billionaire idol to his wife, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mr. Cross, David finally managed to choke out, a nervous, high-pitched giggle escaping his lips. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is Bella, my wife. She does freelance gig work. She's not a boss. She's just Bella. Alexander slowly straightened his posture. The warmth that had been in his eyes when he looked at Bella instantly vanished, replaced by a glacial stare as he turned his attention back to David. A misunderstanding? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. He walked back to his chair but did not sit down. He leaned his heavy hands against the edge of the mahogany table, looming over David. Let me assure you, Mr. Smith, I do not make misunderstandings. When Cross Industries was facing a catastrophic zero-day exploit 3 years ago, a breach that would have wiped out our entire data center and bankrupted us, my board at Sequoia Capital gave me 48 hours to fix with 2. Do you know who patched a DARPA-level security flaw in 36 hours from a laptop in a coffee shop? David swallowed hard, the color completely draining from his face. No, sir. Alexander pointed a sharp finger directly at Bella. She did. Bella Hayes wrote the proprietary AES 256 backend encryption algorithm that currently secures every single asset Cross Industries owns. She is the sole founder and CEO of Vanguard Solutions. She doesn't just work for me, David. She owns 22% of my company's private equity. If Bella decides to pull her licensing agreement tomorrow, Cross Industries ceases to exist. She is the shadow board member you have been desperately trying to impress for the last 2 years. Beatrice gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. The blood rushed to her ears. 22% of Cross Industries. The math hit her like a physical blow. The woman sitting at the end of her table, in a wrinkled black blazer, was worth billions. She was richer than the entire Smith dynasty combined. That's impossible, Chloe blurted out, her voice trembling as she stared at Bella. She doesn't have any money. She drives a 5-year-old Honda. She wears thrift store clothes. Wealth whispers. Little girl. Only insecurity screams. Alexander shot back without missing a beat, his eyes locking onto Chloe with brutal disdain. A lesson this family seems to have entirely missed. Bella finally spoke. Her voice was calm, conversational, yet it commanded the entire room. Alexander, please, sit down. Your bisque is getting cold. Alexander chuckled, a harsh, dry sound, and took his seat. I apologize, Bella, but you have to admit, the irony of this situation is thicker than the soup. I have spent the last 3 weeks trying to arrange a meeting with you to discuss the new Pacific Rim server integration, and my chief of staff tells me you're unavailable due to family obligations. And here, I find you." Alexander paused, his sharp eyes suddenly narrowing as he took in Bella's appearance. He looked at her severe bun, the plain white button-down, the standard-issue black blazer. He had known Bella for years. He knew her style. She favored elegant, understated European fashion. This looked like battle armor. "Bella," Alexander said, his tone shifting from professional to protective, "why are you wearing a work blazer to a formal dinner? And why are you sitting at the furthest edge of the table like a disgraced employee?" Beatrice felt a cold sweat break out across the back of her neck. "Oh well, you see, Mr. Cross," she stammered, attempting a desperate, aristocratic smile. "Bella is just so humble. She prefers to keep a low profile. We absolutely insisted she sit closer. But you know how she is." Bella slowly turned her head and looked directly at Beatrice. The matriarch visibly flinched. "I am sitting here, Alexander," Bella said smoothly, her eyes never leaving Beatrice's terrified face, "because my husband informed me that his mother wanted me to stay in the kitchen and help the caterers. I was told that my presence would be an embarrassment to the family." "Bella," David gasped, jumping up from his chair. Don't say that. You're taking it out of context." "Am I?" Bella asked, shifting her gaze to her husband. "Did you, or did you not, tell me to just play along and hide in the kitchen so you could secure your promotion?" David was hyperventilating now, his eyes darting frantically between Alexander and Bella. The caterers were short-staffed. It was a logistical request." "And the outfit?" Alexander pressed, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. He was not a man who tolerated bullies, especially not those who targeted his most valuable asset. Bella unbuttoned the top button of her blazer and shifted the collar of her white shirt just enough to reveal a stark, angry red burn mark blooming across her collarbone. "I was wearing a vintage silk dress," Bella explained, her voice devoid of emotion, stating the facts as if reading a system error report. "But about 20 minutes before you arrived, Chloe came into my bedroom and intentionally poured a mug of scalding black coffee down my chest. She told me I looked like a trash bag, and that I should stay out of sight so I wouldn't offend you with my peasant presence." A collective gasp from the serving staff, who had been hovering silently near the kitchen doors, pierced the room. Chloe shoved her chair back, her face contorted in panic. "She's lying! I tripped! It was an accident! Mr. Cross, I swear to you, I just tripped." Alexander didn't yell. He didn't slam his fists. He simply pulled a sleek smartphone from his breast pocket and placed it on the table. "David," Alexander said, his voice cold and flat, "you wanted to pitch your structural reorganization to me tonight. Let me give you my immediate feedback." The dining room felt as though all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of it. The Smith family, once untouchable in their Greenwich fortress, were entirely at the mercy of the woman they had systematically abused for 3 years. "Mr. Cross, please," David begged, his hands trembling as he gripped the back of his chair. "This is a private family matter. Bella is just upset. We can fix this. Let me show you the Q3 integration models. My division, your division," Alexander cut him off effortlessly, "is terminated as of this exact second." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Terminated?" David whispered, his knees buckling slightly. You can't do that. I have a team of 40 people. We manage the entire Northeast Corridor. I am the CEO of Cross Industries, and Bella Hayes holds the veto power on all domestic tech integration," Alexander stated, taking a slow sip of his wine. He looked at Bella. "Do you see any reason to keep the Northeast Integration Division operational, boss?" Bella looked at the man she had married. She looked at the man who had promised to stand by her, to protect her, to be her partner. All she saw was a coward in a very expensive suit. "No," Bella said, her voice steady. "The division is redundant. The code they produce is bloated, and the leadership is completely compromised by a lack of basic integrity. Liquidate it." David fell back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was ruined. Not only was he not getting the vice president role, but he was also publicly fired in his own dining room by his own wife. Beatrice, realizing that her son's career and the family's primary connection to modern corporate power was going up in flames, abandoned all pretense of dignity. She scrambled out of her chair and practically ran to Bella's end of the table. "Bella, darling, sweet Bella," Beatrice pleaded, forcing a grotesque, trembling smile. "Let's not be hasty. Families fight. We have misunderstandings. You are David's wife. You love him. You know he's been under so much pressure. And Chloe, she's just young and foolish. We will pay for the dress. We will move you to the master suite. Just, please, tell Mr. Cross to reinstate David." Bella stood up. She was not a tall woman, but in that moment, she towered over Beatrice Smith. "Do not call me darling," Bella said, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "And do not pretend you have ever viewed me as anything other than a parasite. For 3 years, I let you insult me. I let you mock my clothes, my background, and my career. I scrubbed your baseboards, Beatrice. I fixed your internet. I balanced your atrocious household budget when you overspent on country club dues." Bella took a step closer to Beatrice, who instinctively shrank back. "I did all of that," Bella continued, her eyes burning with quiet, controlled fury, "because I loved your son. I thought he was trapped under your shadow, and I wanted to give him the strength to stand on his own. I endured your venom because I believed my marriage was worth it." Bella turned to look at David, who was staring at her with wide, desperate, tear-filled eyes. "Bella, please," David sobbed, reaching a hand out toward her. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know who you were." "That is exactly the point, David," Bella said softly, the tragic reality of their relationship finally settling over her. "You didn't know I was a billionaire. You just thought I was a normal woman who loved you, and you let them destroy me anyway. You didn't stand up for me when I was a nobody. Why would I want you to stand up for me now that you know I'm a somebody?" She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her simple gold wedding band, and placed it gently onto the mahogany table. It clinked against the wood with a heartbreaking finality. "I'm done, David. I'll have my legal team at Harrison and Hayes contact you on Monday. I suggest you hire a very good lawyer, though, since you're currently unemployed, you might want to ask your mother for a loan." Chloe burst into loud, theatrical tears, burying her face in her napkin. Beatrice stood frozen, her mouth open, the architecture of her snobbish reality completely demolished. Alexander Cross stood up, buttoning his jacket. He signaled to his 2 executive assistants, who immediately moved toward the foyer to prepare for departure. "A magnificent dinner, Mrs. Smith," Alexander said, his voice dripping with aristocratic sarcasm. "Truly, a masterclass in understated opulence. I will be sure to tell the board at Sequoia Capital all about the hospitality we received in Greenwich." He turned to Bella, offering his arm. "Shall we, Miss Hayes? I have a helicopter waiting at the Westchester Airport. If we leave now, we can review the Pacific Rim server logs in the air before I head to Tokyo." Bella looked at the ruined silk dress upstairs, the suffocating East Wing, the man crying at the table, and the tyrant matriarch who finally looked as small as she actually was. She didn't need to pack a single bag. Everything of value she owned was already in her head and in her bank accounts. "Let's go, Alexander," Bella said, taking his arm. They walked out of the dining room, their footsteps echoing on the imported Italian cobblestone in the foyer. The heavy oak doors swung open, letting in a gust of crisp, cold November air. Bella stepped out into the rain, leaving the Smith family choking on the ashes of their own arrogance. But the night was far from over, and the revenge Bella had set in motion was only just beginning to unfold. The Monday following the disastrous dinner party arrived with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. For the Smith family, the weekend had been a blur of frantic phone calls, denial, and heavy drinking. David had convinced himself that Alexander Cross's dramatic exit was merely a test of his resolve, a high-stakes corporate stress test. He believed that if he showed up to the Cross Industries headquarters in Manhattan on Monday morning, Armed with his Q3 integration models and a profound apology, he could salvage his career. He was staggeringly wrong. When David pulled his leased Porsche Panamera into the executive parking garage of the towering glass and steel Cross Industries building, his RFID badge failed to raise the barrier. A stern-faced security guard, whom David had ignored for 2 years, stepped out of the booth. "Badge is dead, Mr. Smith," the guard said, leaning against the window. "I have orders from the top floor. You're not permitted on the premises. Human Resources sent your personal effects via courier to your residence at 6 a.m. David's stomach dropped into his designer shoes. "There's a mistake. I need to speak to Mr. Cross, or Bella Hayes. Tell them David is here." The guard pulled a laminated sheet from his pocket. "I have a strict trespass warning, signed by the legal department at Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meager, and Flom. If you don't back out of this driveway in the next 10 seconds, I am calling the NYPD. Have a nice day." David reversed the car, his hands trembling so violently he could barely grip the leather steering wheel. The reality of his termination wasn't just a bruised ego, it was a financial death sentence. What Bella hadn't known, what David had desperately hidden from her, was the sheer magnitude of the Smith family's financial facade. Back in Greenwich, Beatrice Smith was attempting to maintain her iron grip on her social reality. She dressed in her finest Chanel suit and instructed her driver to take her to the Greenwich Country Club for her standing 11 a.m. brunch with the club's steering committee. She planned to spin the weekend's events, claiming Bella had suffered a nervous breakdown and that David was heroically taking a leave of absence. But high society is a small, vicious ecosystem, and Alexander Cross was a god within it. When Beatrice walked into the club's sunlit dining room, the ambient chatter immediately died down. She approached her usual table by the window, only to find it occupied by 3 women who usually hung on her every word. "Oh, Beatrice," murmured Eleanor, a prominent hedge fund wife, not bothering to hide her disdain. "We didn't expect to see you today, especially after what we heard from the partners at Goldman Sachs this morning." Beatrice froze, a cold sweat pricking her scalp. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Eleanor." Eleanor took a delicate sip of her mimosa. Word travels fast when Alexander Cross initiates a complete vendor blacklist. I heard he personally called the board of the country club. He suggested that associating with the Smith family might conflict with his philanthropic donations. This year, the board is reviewing your membership, Beatrice. I suggest you leave before management asks you to." Beatrice fled the club, her pristine image shattering on the imported marble steps. When she returned to the estate, she found David sitting on the floor of his home office, surrounded by cardboard boxes of his belongings, clutching a stack of legal documents. Chloe was pacing the room, screaming into her cell phone. "What is going on?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. David looked up, his eyes bloodshot, a hollow, haunted look on his face. "It's gone, Mother. It's all gone." "What is gone, David? Stop speaking in riddles." "The money," Chloe shrieked, throwing her phone against the sofa. "My trust fund. The bank just declined my Amex at Bergdorf's." David swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "I took out a massive margin loan against my unvested Cross Industries stock options to pay for the estate's property taxes and Chloe's trust payouts. The loan was contingent on my employment and the vesting schedule. Bella exercised her board authority this morning. She didn't just fire me. She invoked a clause regarding gross negligence to void my unvested equity." Beatrice staggered backward, clutching the door frame. "Gross negligence? What negligence?" "The integration models," David whispered, tears spilling down his cheeks. "The code my division was using. It was riddled with security flaws. Bella knew. She let me hang myself with it. Because my equity is voided, the margin loan has defaulted. Morgan Stanley is calling the debt Mother. They're foreclosing on the house. The empire of dirt they had built was collapsing. They had treated Bella like a parasite, blind to the fact that she was the only structural support keeping their hollow lives from caving in, and she had taken her support away with surgical, devastating precision. Later that afternoon, A sleek black town car pulled up to the estate. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. It wasn't Alexander Cross. It was a senior partner from Bella's legal team. He handed David a thick manila envelope. Mr. Smith, these are the divorce proceedings filed by Miss Hayes. She is claiming zero spousal support, demanding zero alimony, and leaving you with exactly what you brought into the marriage. David opened the envelope with shaking hands. Attached to the front was a single, handwritten, sticky note, written in Bella's neat, precise handwriting. It was the same brand of sticky note Chloe used to leave on her dirty laundry. It read, "Clean up your own mess by 5 p.m. Thanks, babe." 6 months had passed since the rain-soaked November night. Bella walked out of the Greenwich estate, leaving the Smith dynasty to collapse under the weight of its own hollow arrogance. The brutal northeastern winter had thawed into a brilliant, optimistic California spring. In the heart of San Francisco, the annual Forbes Global Tech Summit was underway at the sprawling Moscone Center. It was the most exclusive gathering of digital titans, venture capitalists, and innovators on the planet. The ambient hum of the convention hall was the sound of billions of dollars changing hands, of futures being written in code and capital. Major financial networks like CNBC and Bloomberg had set up massive camera rigs, their reporters eagerly anticipating the 2 p.m. keynote address. A world away from the flashing cameras and the VIP lounges, in the dreary, poorly lit basement level of the convention center, David Smith stood behind a folding table. He was sweating through a cheap, off-the-rack polyester suit that fit him terribly. Around his neck hung a plastic lanyard that read, "Exhibitor, Tier 3 Sales, Apex Regional Systems." After the foreclosure of the Greenwich estate and the total depletion of their accounts, David had been forced to take a mid-level, commission-only sales job for a struggling company that sold outdated firewall software to local school districts. His reality was a nightmare from which he could not wake. His mother, Beatrice, the former queen of the Greenwich Country Club, was now renting a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable zip code in Bridgeport. She spent her days aggressively clipping grocery coupons and complaining to neighbors who actively avoided her. Chloe, stripped of her trust fund and her endless credit limits, had been forced to take a job as a barista at a local chain coffee shop, her once curated Instagram feed entirely abandoned. David adjusted his fraying collar, watching the crowds of successful executives bypass his booth on their way to the main auditorium. He glanced at the digital monitors hanging from the ceiling, which were currently broadcasting the stage of the main hall. The keynote was about to begin. Alexander Cross strode onto the massive stage, looking as formidable and untouchable as ever. The screen behind him displayed the sleek, minimalist logo of Cross Industries, alongside a second logo that the global market had only recently begun to recognize: Vanguard Solutions. For years, the technology sector has relied on the concept of the lone genius standing in the spotlight. Alexander's booming baritone echoed through the massive hall and through the speakers above David's pathetic booth. "We glorify the loudest voices in the room, but true power, true, unbreakable innovation, rarely seeks the applause of the crowd. It seeks perfection in the silence." The massive auditorium was packed to capacity, a hushed reverence falling over the thousands of attendees. "Over the last 5 years, my company has navigated a minefield of global cyber threats," Alexander continued, a proud, genuine smile breaking across his stoic face. "We have remained impenetrable, not because of my leadership, but because we were secured, optimized, and entirely elevated by a shadow partner, a brilliant mind who preferred the quiet hum of a server rack to the flash of a camera lens." Down in the basement, David's breath hitched in his throat. He abandoned his booth, ignoring the angry shout of his regional manager, and began to sprint up the escalators toward the main concourse. "But the shadows are no place for a visionary," Alexander announced, his voice rising to meet the anticipation of the crowd. "Today, Cross Industries is officially acquiring Vanguard Solutions in a merger that will fundamentally redefine global cybersecurity infrastructure, and I am profoundly honored to finally introduce to the world its founder, its CEO, and my new co-chairman. Alexander stepped back, gesturing toward the wing of the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Bella Hayes. The applause was a physical force, deafening and immediate. Bella walked onto the stage, and the sight of her nearly brought David to his knees as he pushed his way through the heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium. She was breathtaking. Gone was the severe, tight bun and the oversized, wrinkled blazer she used to wear like a shield. She wore a flawlessly tailored, emerald green suit by Alexander McQueen. Her dark hair fell in soft, confident waves around her shoulders. She moved with the undeniable grace of a woman who fully owned her power, her intellect, and her staggering worth. She shook Alexander's hand, stepped up to the microphone, and looked out at the sea of billionaires, innovators, and journalists. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She commanded the very air in the room. "Thank you, Alexander," Bella said, her voice smooth, steady, and projecting absolute authority. "For years, I believed that staying hidden was the best way to protect my work. But I recently learned a very valuable lesson about the danger of letting others dictate your worth. True security isn't just about building firewalls to keep the malicious elements out. It is about having the courage to stand in the light and claim exactly what you have built." The crowd erupted again. David stood by the exit signs, shivering, a ghost haunting a life he used to think he deserved. He watched the woman he had treated like an embarrassment hold the most powerful people in the world in the palm of her hand. When the keynote concluded, the stage was rushed by eager venture capitalists and tech journalists. Bella, flanked by a phalanx of private security, began to make her way down the center aisle toward the VIP exit, driven by a desperate, pathetic cocktail of regret, financial ruin, and delusion. David shoved his way past a Bloomberg camera crew and threw himself toward the velvet ropes cordoning off her path. "Bella," David shouted, his voice cracking horribly. "Bella, please, just 1 minute." Two massive bodyguards immediately stepped in front of him, hands firmly planted on David's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. Bella paused. Her emerald suit caught the bright stadium lighting. She turned slowly. When her eyes finally landed on David, the oxygen left his lungs. He was expecting anger. He was hoping for a glimmer of the old affection. The girl who used to type code in the corner of his bedroom. The girl who used to bring him coffee when he was stressed. But there was neither. There was only a terrifying, absolute indifference. "Miss Hayes, do you know this man?" one of the security guards asked, his eyes scanning David's cheap exhibitor badge with open disdain. David stared at her pleadingly, tears welling in his eyes. "Bella, you look incredible. I saw the merger announcement. I'm so proud of you. I wanted to see how you were doing. I miss you, Bella. We all miss you." Bella tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a scientist might look at a failed, unremarkable experiment. She took in his frayed cuffs, the deep exhaustion etched into his face, the desperate, sunken slouch of his shoulders. Karma had not just balanced the scales, it had obliterated them completely. "I'm doing exactly what I was always doing, David," Bella said softly, her voice perfectly calm and carrying just enough for him to hear. "Building an empire." "Bella, I was so wrong," David begged, a sob escaping his throat as he strained against the security guard's grip. "Mother was wrong. She's living in a terrible apartment. Chloe is serving coffee. We lost everything. I have nothing. Please, is there any way we can just talk? Maybe a low-level position at Vanguard? I know the integration side of the business. I can help you." Bella let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her victory was absolute, cemented in the very foundation of the building they were standing in. "You didn't lose everything, David," Bella corrected him gently, her gaze piercing right through his fragile, shattered ego. "You just lost the illusion of who you thought you were. And without my money to prop you up, you finally had to meet the real you." She offered him a single, devastatingly polite smile. "It seems you don't enjoy his company." She turned back to her executive team. "Let's go. The Sequoia partners are waiting in the boardroom. Bella, please, David cried out one last time, his voice echoing over the ambient noise of the convention center. Bella Hayes didn't look back. She walked out of the auditorium and into the bright California sun, leaving the ghost of the Smith family behind her, forever trapped in the shadows she had long since abandoned. Bella's story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured by the zip code you live in, the designer labels in your closet, or the arrogance you project into the world. It's measured by your intellect, your integrity, and the quiet resilience you build when no one is watching. The Smith family thought they were breaking a useless daughter-in-law, but in reality, they were simply forging the armor of a titan. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness, and never underestimate the person working quietly in the corner. They might just own the building you're standing in. If this story of ultimate karma and undeniable revenge sent chills down your spine, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to always know their worth, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible, real-life drama stories every single week. What would you have done in Bella's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.